Sunlight caught the chipped sapphire on the servant's finger, freezing Nicholas in his tracks. A single breath shattered a decade of aristocratic lies. That tarnished silver band wasn't just cheap jewelry. It was a desperate oath, sworn in a soot-stained orphanage, a vow that could now destroy a dynasty. Crystal chandeliers cast a fractured, brilliant glow across the grand ballroom of Harrington Manor. It was the height of the 1884 London season, and the air was thick with the scent of imported hothouse orchids, expensive cigar smoke, and unspoken political alliances. Nicholas Harrington, the Duke of Pembroke, stood at the apex of the sweeping marble staircase. Groomed to absolute perfection, his dark tailcoat tailored flawlessly to his broad shoulders, he was the picture of entrenched British nobility. Beside him stood Lady Violet Ashcombe. Wrapped in shimmering emerald silk, she was an heiress of an ancient, albeit financially crumbling bloodline. Their impending engagement was the worst-kept secret in Mayfair. It was a transaction of the highest order. Nicholas required her family's impeccable pedigree to wash away the lingering whispers of his sudden ascension to the dukedom, while Violet desperately needed his vast fortune to save her father's failing tin mines in Cornwall. There was no love between them, only a cold, calculated mutual survival. "You seem distracted, Nicholas," Violet murmured, her painted lips curving into a smile that did not reach her calculating blue eyes. She tapped her ivory fan against his forearm. "The Earl of Clarendon is staring. Do try to look as though you enjoy my company." Nicholas offered a tight, practiced smile. "My apologies, Violet. The heat of the room is simply oppressive." He turned to signal for refreshment, just as a maid approached from the servants' corridor. She walked with her head bowed, balancing a silver tray laden with crystal flutes of champagne. Her uniform was standard starched white apron over a sombre grey dress, but there was a jagged stiffness to her posture, an unfamiliarity with the graceful subservience expected in a ducal household. As she offered the tray to Nicholas, her hand trembled slightly. The harsh gaslight of the corridor reflected off a crude object on her right hand. Nicholas reached for a flute, but his hand stopped mid-air. His breath hitched, trapped in his chest. There, resting on the maid's roughened, red-knuckled ring finger, was a twisted piece of tarnished silver wire. Cradled within the clumsy setting was a cracked, misshapen piece of blue sea glass, polished by the tide to resemble a sapphire. The opulent ballroom dissolved around him. The suffocating scent of orchids was instantly replaced by the phantom stench of damp coal soot, boiled cabbage, and raw sewage. London, 1869. Before he was Nicholas Harrington, Duke of Pembroke, he was simply Nate, a nameless, starving ward of the Spitalfields parish workhouse. He was an urchin whose world consisted of 12-hour shifts picking oakum and dodging the cruel rattan cane of the workhouse master. But he had not been entirely alone. There was Bridget Roberts, a fiery-haired, fiercely loyal girl who had been dumped at the workhouse steps after her mother succumbed to the winter consumption. Bridget had been his protector, his shadow, and his only source of warmth in a world designed to freeze them out. When the older boys cornered Nate in the cobbled alleyways, it was Bridget who fought them off with jagged stones and wild teeth. When the rations were cut to nothing but watery gruel, it was Bridget who smuggled half a stale loaf of bread under her apron, pressing it into his hands in the dead of night. The ring had been a prize from the mudlarks. At 12 years old, Nate had dragged himself through the freezing, toxic sludge of the River Thames at low tide, scavenging for anything of value. He had found the blue glass half buried in the muck and twisted a piece of discarded copper wire around it, scrubbing it until it shone. He remembered the damp, rat-infested cellar of the workhouse, where he had given it to her. They had been huddled beneath a single moth-eaten blanket, shivering uncontrollably. "It's a real sapphire, B." He had lied, his voice cracking with the cold. "Like the Queen's wear, When we get out of here, I'm going to buy you a real one. 100 of them." She had smiled a brilliant, hopeful thing in the gloom and let him slip the crude wire onto her finger. "I don't need 100, Nate, just this one. I will marry you." He had promised a solemn vow from a starving boy. "I swear it. We'll have a house with a fireplace in every room, and we'll never be cold again." The promise was broken a month later. A velvet-lined carriage bearing the crest of the Duke of Pembroke had arrived at the workhouse gates. The previous Duke, lacking a legitimate heir after a tragic boating accident, claimed his sons had tracked down his estranged, disgraced brother's bastard child. Nate was ripped from the only home he knew by men in livery. He had screamed for Bridget, fighting against the footman, but he was thrown into the carriage and locked away. For a year, locked in a country estate, while tutors brutalized his Cockney accent into polished Queen's English, Nicholas had begged to send for her. Finally, the old Duke had handed him a parish record. Bridget Roberts, deceased. Cholera. The grief had shattered the boy named Nate, hardening him into the cold, untouchable Nicholas Harrington. He buried his past beneath layers of Latin horseback riding and aristocratic duty. Now, standing in his own ballroom, 15 years later, the ghost of Spitalfields was holding a tray of champagne. Nicholas's eyes dragged upward from the ring, tracing the line of the maid's coarse sleeve past the starched white collar to her face. The fiery hair was tucked away beneath a severe linen cap, and her cheeks were hollowed by years of hard labor, but the eyes, defiant storm cloud grey, were unmistakably hers. Bridget. She was alive. Bridget looked up, her gaze colliding with his. For a fraction of a second, the mask of the obedient servant slipped. A profound, searing hatred flashed in her grey eyes, a lifetime of betrayal contained in a single look. Then, just as quickly, the mask slammed back into place. She lowered her head, dropped a flawless, subservient curtsy, and backed away into the shadows of the corridor. "Nicholas." Violet's voice cut through the roaring in his ears, sharp and irritated. "Did you hear a word I just said? The orchestra is preparing for the waltz." Nicholas blinked, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The glass flute in his hand was in danger of snapping under his grip. "Forgive me, Violet." He managed to say, his voice sounding hollow and distant to his own ears. He set the untouched glass onto a passing waiter's tray. "A sudden matter concerning the estate requires my immediate attention. I shall return shortly." Before she could protest, Nicholas turned on his heel and strode toward the servants' corridor, leaving his furious fiancée and the glittering world of Mayfair behind him. The servant quarters of Harrington Manor were a subterranean labyrinth of whitewashed brick copper pipes and heavy oak doors. It was a stark utilitarian contrast to the velvet and gold above, operating with military precision. Nicholas navigated the narrow corridors, ignoring the shocked gasps of footmen and scullery maids who threw themselves against the walls at the sight of the Duke in their domain. He found her in the silver-polishing pantry. Bridget was standing by the deep stone sink, her back to the door, aggressively scrubbing a silver platter with a rag of crushed chalk and ammonia. The harsh chemical smell burned Nicholas's nose as he stepped into the small room, clicking the heavy door shut behind him. The lock engaged with a loud metallic thud. Bridget stiffened the rag, halting its furious motion against the silver. She did not turn around. "You should not be down here." "Your Grace," she said. Her voice was different. The harsh Cockney edges had been smoothed out by years of survival, but the underlying grit remained. "It is highly improper." Nicholas took a slow, trembling step forward. The polished aristocrat was fracturing the scared workhouse boy, clawing his way to the surface. "Where did you get that ring?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Bridget slowly set the platter down. She turned to face him, wiping her wet hands on her apron. She looked at him, not with the reverence of a servant to a duke, but with the cold appraisal of a survivor facing an enemy. I bought it from a peddler in Cheapside, Your Grace. She lied smoothly, her grey eyes flat and unreadable. Do not lie to me, Bridget. The name tore from his throat, an agonizing release after 15 years of silence. At the sound of her name, a muscle feathered in her jaw. She closed the distance between them, stepping so close that he could smell the lye soap on her skin. There was no fear in her, only a terrifying, quiet fury. Bridget Roberts died in the Spitalfields infirmary. She hissed her voice, dripping with venom. She raised her right hand, thrusting the twisted wire and the cracked blue glass into the space between them. This ring was given to me by a dead boy. A boy who promised we would never be cold again. But he lied, didn't he? He found himself a velvet bed and left his rubbish behind to rot. Nicholas felt as though he had been struck. He reached out his gloved hands, grasping her shoulders. She tried to flinch away, but he held her firmly, desperately. They told me you were dead, he pleaded, the polished veneer completely gone. The old Duke. He handed me the parish registry. It had your name. The winter fever of '69. I grieved you, B. I spent months screaming for you in this very house. I never stopped looking for you until they proved to me you were gone in the dirt. Bridget stared at him, searching his frantic, desperate eyes. For a moment, the hardened shell cracked, and a flicker of the little girl from the workhouse shone through. But survival had taught her bitter lessons. She shoved him back, breaking his grip. Do not play the victim with me, Nicholas. She spat, using his given name like a weapon. I know about the stipend. I know about the blood money. Nicholas froze. What stipend? Bridget let out a harsh, humourless laugh. The £50 a month. The money your uncle, the old Duke, set aside for my care and placement upon extracting you from the parish. It was the price of your silence, the price to ensure the bastard heir had a clean slate. I was to be given an apprenticeship a way out. I knew nothing of this. Nicholas swore, his mind racing, trying to assemble the jagged pieces of the past. I swear on my life, B, I thought you were dead. If there was money, where did it go? Who told you this? The master of the workhouse. Bridget replied, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. Before he drank himself to death last winter, he confessed. He never gave me a copper of it. He told me the Duke of Pembroke paid him handsomely to write a fake death certificate, so the new heir wouldn't come looking for the gutter trash he left behind. The revelation hit Nicholas with physical force. His uncle had orchestrated it all. The old man had seen Bridget as a tether to a past that needed erasing. He had bought her death to secure Nicholas's future. B, Nicholas choked out, reaching for her hand, the hand bearing the worthless, priceless ring. I didn't know. You must believe me. I would have burned this entire estate to the ground before leaving you there. Bridget looked down at his hand, covering hers. She slowly pulled away. It doesn't matter anymore. The boy I knew is dead. And I am not here for a reunion, Your Grace. I am here for my money. My brother, my real brother, born after I was thrown out of Spitalfields, is rotting in a debtor's prison because of a man named Thomas Baxter. I need £200 to buy his life. I infiltrated your staff to steal what is rightfully mine, what you owe me. Before Nicholas could process the danger she had put herself in, before he could offer her everything he owned, the heavy oak door of the pantry rattled violently. A sharp, authoritative knock echoed through the small room. Nicholas! It was Violet. The blood drained from Bridget's face. She stepped back instantly, dropping her gaze and hiding her right hand behind her apron. Nicholas, open this door at once, Violet's voice demanded from the corridor, devoid of her usual honeyed tone. It was sharp, suspicious, and dangerous. Nicholas looked at Bridget, his heart breaking all over again at the sight of her cowering in the presence of his fiancée. He straightened his tailcoat, forcing the Duke of Pembroke back into his skin. He stepped to the door and unlocked it, pulling it open. Lady Violet Ashcombe stood in the corridor, her emerald silk stark against the whitewashed walls. Her eyes darted from Nicholas to the pale maid standing by the sink. A slow, chilling smile spread across Violet's face as she took in the scene. "Well, well," Violet purred, stepping into the pantry and closing the door behind her. She did not look at Nicholas. Her predatory gaze was fixed entirely on Bridget. "I had wondered how long it would take for you two to find each other, though I must admit I expected a bit more. Romance, given the tragic history." Nicholas stepped between them, shielding Bridget. "Violet, what is the meaning of this? You know nothing of this girl." Violet laughed, a delicate, icy sound. She reached into the pocket of her silk gown and withdrew a folded, yellowed piece of parchment. "Oh, Nicholas, you vastly underestimate my family's diligence," Violet said, unfolding the paper. It bore the crest of the old Duke of Pembroke. "When my father agreed to this marriage, he had your entire, unsavory past investigated. We couldn't have any illegitimate bastards crawling out of the London slums to blackmail us, could we?" She looked past Nicholas, locking eyes with Bridget. "We knew the death certificate was forged." Violet revealed her voice, dripping with triumph. "We knew she was alive. In fact, it was my father's agents who intercepted the old Duke's stipend and paid off the workhouse master to keep her hidden. And it was I who recognized her forged references last week and hired her into this house." Nicholas stared at the woman he was supposed to marry, a cold horror washing over him. "You brought her here. Why?" "To control you, darling," Violet said softly, her eyes glinting with malice. "A duke with a secret is a pliable duke. Now here is the ultimatum. You will walk back upstairs, announce our engagement, and sign the capital transfer for the tin mines tonight." Violet turned her cruel gaze back to Bridget. "And if you refuse, or if this little mudlark breathes a word of this to anyone, I will ensure that Thomas Baxter receives a generous anonymous donation, on the condition that her little brother is moved to the lowest, most disease-ridden cell in Newgate Prison, where he will surely perish before the month is out." The silence in the scullery was deafening, broken only by the distant muffled strains of the waltz playing in the ballroom above a dance of the elite built on the broken backs and buried secrets of the damned. Silence suffocated the cramped scullery as Violet's venomous ultimatum hung in the damp air. The aristocratic mask that Nicholas had worn for a decade threatened to crack under the sheer weight of his fiancée's cruelty. Bridget stood rigid against the stone sink, her grey eyes wide, with a mixture of terror for her brother and a crushing realization of the power dynamics at play. Violet had trapped them both neatly within the gilded cage of high society. Nicholas forced his hands to unclench, smoothing the lapels of his dark tailcoat. He had survived the brutal streets of Spitalfields by knowing exactly when to fight and when to feign defeat. He bowed his head, adopting a posture of total surrender. "You play a dangerous game, Violet," Nicholas said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "But you have made your point. I will not risk an innocent boy's life for my pride. Go upstairs. Tell the orchestra to prepare the announcement fanfare. I shall join you in the ballroom in 10 minutes to sign the transfer and make our engagement public." Violet's cruel smile widened into a victorious smirk. She had broken a duke. "A wise decision, darling. Do try to wash the stench of the servants' quarters off your hands before you touch me for the waltz." Gathering her emerald silk skirts, she turned and glided out of the pantry, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind her. The moment her footsteps faded down the corridor, the rigid subservience vanished from Bridget. She crumpled against the sink, her fierce exterior shattering. A single desperate sob tore from her throat. "Arthur!" she choked out, burying her face in her hands. "She's going to kill my brother Nate. Thomas Baxter is a monster. He runs the debtors' wards like a slaughterhouse." Hearing her call him Nate sent a jolt of raw electricity through Nicholas's veins. He closed the distance between them, gently pulling her hands away from her tear-streaked face. "Listen to me, Bea. Look at me," he commanded softly, his dark eyes burning with an intensity she remembered from the freezing alleys of their youth. "I failed you 15 years ago because I was a weak, powerless boy. I am the Duke of Pembroke now. I have the wealth of empires at my fingertips, and I swear to you on my life, Violet Ashcombe will not win tonight." Bridget searched his face, her breath catching. "What can you do? She has the ledger. She has Baxter. She has an amateur's understanding of London's financial underworld." Nicholas replied, his mind racing with a sudden, audacious plan. "Thomas Baxter is a ruthless debt collector. Yes, but even he answers to a higher authority. He finances his predatory loans through the major banking houses." Nicholas grabbed a piece of charcoal used for marking silver and tore a blank inventory sheet from the wall. He needed real power, and he needed it instantly. His mind went to Edward Boring, the first Baron Revelstoke and head of Barings Bank. Lord Revelstoke was a personal acquaintance of Nicholas's, a man whose financial reach dictated the fates of entire nations, let alone petty London debt collectors. "Where is your brother being held?" Nicholas asked, his hand flying across the paper as he drafted a legally binding promissory note. "Fleet Prison, the Overflow Ward," Bridget whispered, watching him with cautious hope. "And the debt? £200. Nicholas scoffed bitterly. £200. A sum Violet spent on a single Parisian gown was the price of a human life. He finished the note, authorizing a withdrawal of £5,000 from his personal vaults to Barings Bank, effectively buying out Thomas Baxter's entire portfolio of debts with immediate unconditional release orders for Arthur Roberts. "Stay here," Nicholas ordered, folding the crude paper. "Lock this door. Do not let anyone in. I am going to send my carriage with this note directly to Lord Revelstoke's private residence. Baxter will be bought and dissolved before Violet even finishes her champagne." Bridget reached out her fingers, brushing against his sleeve. The twisted wire ring with the cracked blue glass caught the dim pantry light. "Nate, if this fails, she will destroy you. She will ruin the Harrington name." Nicholas looked down at the tarnished sapphire, the only real thing in a world of expensive lies. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against the rough, ruined skin of her knuckles. "There is no Harrington name without you, Bea. There never was." With that, he slipped out of the pantry, locking her safely inside. He bypassed the grand staircase, taking the hidden servant stairs 2 at a time until he reached his private study. He summoned Captain Harrison, his fiercely loyal chief of security, and a former dragoon guard. Handing the bewildered captain the drafted note and a heavy pouch of gold sovereigns, Nicholas gave him his orders. "Ride to Revelstoke's estate in Mayfair. Wake him if you must. Buy Baxter's debts, take the Duke's guard to Fleet Prison, and extract a boy named Arthur Roberts. Do not return without him." Harrison saluted sharply and vanished into the night. Now Nicholas only had to buy time. He turned toward the double doors of the ballroom, preparing to walk into the viper's nest. Gaslight blazed from the crystal chandeliers, casting a golden hue over the swirling dancers in the Harrington Manor ballroom. The orchestra was reaching a crescendo as Nicholas stepped through the arched doorway. The murmurs of the aristocracy swelled, hundreds of eyes turning toward the highly anticipated couple. Violet stood near the orchestra dais, her father, the frail and desperate Lord Ashcombe, hovering nervously beside her. She caught Nicholas's eye and tapped her fan impatiently, gesturing toward the center of the room. It was time for the announcement. Nicholas walked slowly across the polished marble floor. Every step felt like walking to the gallows. He kept his eyes locked on the grand clock above the entryway. 11:45. Harrison needed at least an hour to navigate the London streets, wake the Baron, and reach the prison. Nicholas had to stall. "You took your time, darling," Violet hissed under her breath as he approached, though her face maintained a radiant public smile. "My father has the transfer papers in his study. The ink is waiting." "A duke does not rush, Violet," Nicholas replied smoothly, offering his arm. "Shall we give them the waltz they are expecting before we ruin the evening with business?" Violet's eyes narrowed slightly, but the allure of being seen as the future Duchess of Pembroke in the arms of Mayfair's most eligible bachelor was too strong to resist. She took his arm and Nicholas led her onto the floor. For 30 agonizing minutes, Nicholas spun his blackmailer across the room. He engaged in meaningless banter with passing earls and countesses, expertly dodging Violet's increasingly frantic whispers to stop the music and make the announcement. He was playing a dangerous game of aristocratic chicken, and the clock was ticking mercilessly. Just past midnight, a commotion at the ballroom entrance caught his eye. Captain Harrison, still wearing his riding cloak, pushed past 2 protesting footmen. He caught Nicholas's gaze across the crowded room and gave a single sharp nod. The breath Nicholas had been holding for the last hour left his lungs in a rush. Arthur was safe. The leverage was gone. Nicholas abruptly stopped dancing, leaving Violet standing awkwardly in the center of the floor. He signaled the orchestra conductor, drawing a finger across his throat. The music ground to a discordant halt. The sudden silence in the ballroom was deafening. "Ladies and gentlemen," Nicholas's voice boomed, projecting easily across the vast space. The polished Queen's English was flawless, but there was a dangerous metallic edge to his tone. "I beg your pardon for the interruption. Lady Violet Ashcombe and I have a matter of great importance to discuss regarding our future." Violet beamed, stepping forward to link her arm through his. "Yes, my father and the Duke have come to a wonderful arrangement. An arrangement that is entirely terminated as of this moment." Nicholas cut in his voice, ringing like a gunshot. The ballroom erupted into a chorus of shocked gasps. Lord Ashcombe dropped his brandy glass, the crystal shattering loudly against the marble. Violet recoiled, the colour draining from her perfectly powdered face. "Nicholas, what are you doing?" She hissed, her facade crumbling. "You cannot do this." "The boy is currently enjoying a hot meal by the fire in my private drawing room, under the protection of my personal guard," Nicholas whispered, leaning in so only she could hear. "Lord Revelstoke sends his regards. Thomas Baxter works for me now. Your leverage is gone, Violet." Violet staggered backward, as if physically struck. The emerald silk seemed to lose its luster. She was ruined. Without his fortune, the Ashcombe tin mines would collapse by Monday morning. Nicholas turned back to his stunned guests. "It has come to my attention that the Ashcombe estate has engaged in deeply concerning financial irregularities, attempting to secure a marriage through fraudulent ledgers and coercion. The House of Harrington will not bind itself to such dishonour. Lady Violet, Lord Ashcombe, you will find yourselves escorted from my property immediately." The humiliation was absolute. Whispers tore through the crowd like wildfire. Defeated, trembling with rage and shame, Violet gathered her skirts and fled the ballroom, her broken father shuffling frantically behind her. As the door slammed shut on the Ashcombes, the aristocracy stared at the Duke, waiting for the fallout. But Nicholas's eyes were no longer on the nobility. He looked past the velvet and the diamonds toward the shadowed archway of the servants' corridor. Bridget stood there, having slipped upstairs amidst the chaos. She was still wearing her rough grey uniform, her white apron stained with silver polish. But to Nicholas, she was the only light in the room. Ignoring the collective gasp of high society, the Duke of Pembroke walked away from the centre of the ballroom. He crossed the floor, stepping out of the glittering world of Mayfair and into the shadows. He stopped in front of the fiery-haired workhouse girl, the ghosts of Spitalfields finally laid to rest. Gently he reached out and took her rough, red-knuckled hand, running his thumb over the tarnished silver wire and the cracked blue sea glass. "I told you I was going to buy you 100 real ones," Nicholas murmured, his voice thick with unshed tears, completely indifferent to the hundreds of aristocrats staring in absolute shock. Bridget looked up at him, a radiant, tearful smile breaking across her hardened face, transforming her back into the girl who had saved his life in the dark. "I told you, Nate," she whispered, her fingers tightening around his. "I only ever needed this one." Did this tale of lost love and aristocratic betrayal keep you on the edge of your seat? If Nicholas and Bridget's fight for their happily ever after captured your heart, please hit that like button, share this video with fellow historical romance lovers, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more dramatic, twist-filled storytelling. Drop a comment below on what era we should explore next.